What up, y'all? Welcome to a special tutorial on my mastering chain. This video is going to be exclusive to y'all that cop this mastering chain template. So go ahead, tune in, load it up, and check out the plugins and the thought process that I use when mastering a record inside the box, all right? So inside this mastering template, you'll see I've given you 10 tracks. Now, I've included all of these tracks in case you are mastering a full project like an album or EP. Now, you may need to add more or not use all of the tracks in here. And you can even use this template even if you're just mastering one record, okay? So here's a little bit into my thought process. The first thing that you need to do when you open up this template is import your files, okay? Now, for mastering, it is crucial to make sure that the files are not already limited. So in a lot of my templates, you will notice that I have a L2 on the master fader, and I like that to kind of get an idea of what the record would sound like when it is limited. And I like to kind of mix through that to make sure that everything is going to be sounding consistent even after the mastering process is done. Now, when you are sending to a mastering engineer, or if you're going to be doing the mastering yourself, you want to bounce down your files with enough headroom so that they actually can be mastered, okay? So you want that your master output level of your file, of your mixed file, to be about -6 to -4 dB, okay? That's what you're going to be looking for. Now, when you export that file, a couple of things. You want to make sure you export it in a wave, interleaved, right? You're going to bounce it down as a wave, interleaved. If you record it at 48 kilohertz, keep it at 48 kilohertz. Otherwise, if you are at 44.1, that's fine as well. You can keep it there. Wherever you recorded at the sample rate, keep that same sample rate. Hopefully all of y'all are recording using 24-bit though, because I really like to master with 24-bit files. This gives us a lot more information to work with, and it gives us more dynamic range for our overall mix, and we can make things a whole lot louder, more punchy, more boomy by using that 24-bit file versus a 16-bit file. So when you are recording your sessions or exporting and bouncing down, let's always export to 24-bit, and 44.1 or 48K will work, okay? So I've already gone through and mixed a couple of files. Now, these are just some rough mixes of some hooks I got just for this tutorial. You know, it's not going to be an extreme mastering, but you first want to get your mix done. Get the mix to where it sounds good, to a point that you feel like, you know, this is the best point that I can do, right? So the mixing is done. And then once you bounce down that mixed file, we're going to bring it over here into our mastering template. So I'm just going to use import audio to bring these files in. I have a couple of files here, pre-master. Just going to take these two. I don't need to do any copying or converting because, again, I make sure that this session's parameters are the same as the files that I'm using. And again, my parameters are always 24-bit, 48 kilohertz. All right. So these imported as new tracks, but I don't really need them to be on a separate track. So I'm just going to drag and drop them to a couple of the mastering tracks. Now, when you're mastering a full project, this is where it's going to become important, right? You kind of want to master and double check for alignment, like the end of the song from one song to the beginning of another. So by bringing all of the songs from within the same project into this one session, that gives you the ability to be able to check continuity from song to song. Also, as one song is fading out and the other song is starting up, how is that gap between those records, all right? If you're doing something like a mixtape style or anything like that, you can even do fades in between these records and all of that kind of stuff, and really get as creative as you want. But yeah, if I'm mixing or mastering an entire project, I'll import all of the files into my mastering session and line them up in order from how the song goes, from how the record goes, right? From 1 to 10 or whatever it is, and you know, and master through in that same order. All right. So I just want to, sometimes when you're mastering, you may need to add fades and stuff like that. I know I didn't fade this file, so I'm just going to put a little fade on here just so we can see what it'll sound like crossing into this other record. Right, and then maybe I need to add fades there. So that part is just all about lining up your records. And again, if you have multiple records, you would stagger them throughout the session so that they're not all just stacked up on top of each other. When you play one, everything plays. You want them to be lined up sequentially along your timeline. So after you've gotten the tracks into the mastering session, the next thing you want to do is, let's just take a look at some of the processing that I have on each one of these tracks, okay? Now, I have a few plugins already inserted here, but I'm going to start off by bypassing all of these. And then, if you also notice, all these tracks, let's just go over to the mix window here. If you notice, all of these tracks are output to my master bus. Now, on my master bus, there are a few more processors to kind of give a global process, and if I need, over the group of tracks as a whole, okay? And we'll touch on that later, but I'm gonna make these inactive, especially this Ozone plugin. Now, this may be a plugin that you guys don't have. I'm using Ozone 7. That's the version I have. I know they're up to like 8 or 9 or something like that by now. But if you don't have this, it's okay. And some of these plugins you may not have, but the thought process and the patterns are going to be the same. So I'm going to break down, the order of why I'm doing what I'm doing so that you can do it with whatever plugins you have. So again, my point was this Isotope plugin, the Ozone 7, actually, even when you bypass it, it still alters the sound because it has some, technology in it that allows you to listen. What's it called? Automatically match the gain. It matches the gain even when it's bypassed. So we don't want to do that. I don't want to match the gain. So I'm just going to make that plugin inactive. And actually everything on my master bus, I'm just going to make it active for now, okay? And then I just bypass everything on the actual channel. So let's start off with my first track. And when I'm mastering a record, I'm kind of doing this pseudo mastering. I like to start with the loudest part of the record. Most of the time it's going to be like the last hook or something like that. And I kind of set my levels for that section. Now, you may need to go in and do automation for section to section changes with some of these parameters and some of these processors that we're going to be doing. But it's not always 100% necessary to do the automation. But if you feel that some sections need treatment different than others, then you can automate your mastering processes as well. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and start out with the loudest part of the record and kind of make a selection over there. And let's just see what we got here, okay? So let's just listen to the section of this record.
The people want to show. Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Can't stop this. Can't stop this. Can't stop this flow.
One of the first processes that we need to do is control the low end frequencies, okay? This is going to help to clear up some bandwidth for the rest of the frequencies that we do actually need in this mix. Now, as you might know already, some low frequencies like under 20 hertz and below, they really just aren't needed. We can't even hear those frequencies as humans. And a lot of times what that does is just cause some extra rumble and noise that we don't need. All right. So what I'm going to do is actually use a high pass filter to roll off the super low end of this audio file. And with this, I'm using the linear phase EQ. This is a Waves plugin, but you can use any high pass filter. Really, I just like this one because it's very simple and to the point. It does the one job and it does it well. All right. So with this linear phase EQ, basically, I'm just using my one band here. I'm using my high pass filter, rolling off everything at about 23 hertz and lower. And that's really it, right? Just initially cleaning up that low frequency, man.
The people want to show. Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this.
Just make sure that you're not, taking out too much of the fatness there. If you realize that your record is kind of losing its energy, then maybe you are taking out too much of that low end. And you want to back it off a little bit. But for this record, that's going to be cool. So that's step one, is to just control that low end and get rid of those frequencies that we just ultimately don't need. Now, the next step in mastering is going to be noise reduction. And for this, I'm using another Isotope plugin, but there's a bunch of noise reduction plugins out there. And not every record is going to require you to use noise reduction, okay? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight on how I like to use noise reduction if possible, just a little bit, but there's a full tutorials somewhere else that you can find on how to actually use these noise reduction plugins. But if you have noise in your track, and you might want to just at least try it out, because you might find noise and you might not always notice that it's there, but once it's gone, you'll notice that it was there, if that makes sense. Like when it's there, you be like, oh, I don't hear any noise. But once you use a noise reduction plugin, like, damn, that sounds clean. Okay, so for the noise reduction plugin, I like to use this Isotope RX denoise plugin. So basically what you would do here, and I don't really have any noise in this mix, but let's see.
I'm on a roll.
Let me bypass this real quick, see if I can hear anything.
I'm on a roll, it's out of control. They watching, the people want to show. Am I gonna fumble?
Yeah, because I didn't really leave any head or tail noise in this mix, it's going to be hard for me to do this. But what you typically want to do when you're using a noise reduction plugin is find a section of your audio that has noise, right? Now this could be some white noise, some hiss, some hum, whatever it is. But you know, maybe like at the very beginning or at the very end of the record, you might find that noise when no other music is playing, but it's just like the microphone hiss or some other kind of noise that was introduced maybe from some plugin or something that you used. And simply what you do when you select that noise, you just hit the learn button on this particular plugin. You play it for a while. You know, the plugin will sense that noise, and once it's learned it, then it will reduce that noise.
Am I gonna fumble?
You can choose how much reduction and at what point you want to consider the noise. Be very careful with this, because obviously you can make your song sound very unnatural and very dark by using too much of this noise reduction plugin, okay? So that's something to learn about, play with that, and that's ultimately the next step in my mastering chain after I clean up my low end frequencies, is to apply any noise reduction if necessary. The next process in my mastering chain is stereo enhancement. Now this is how you get those mixes to be really big, fat, and wide and lush, okay? Now if you're just using simple waves plugins, what I like to use is the S1 imager. This just helps to push the wideness just a little bit further to the tips of those speakers. It just helps to push it out. The controls are really simple. You just choose how much width you want to add to your mix. It's really that easy. So let's just bypass this. And let's see, I think that, yep, that's the medium setting there, the unity setting. We're gonna bypass this. I'm gonna play this, and then you'll notice as I push up the width, the mix will start to get a little wider.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow.
Whoa, that sounds so cool right there. Another thing that to take note of is that when you are using this wide plugin, the wider you go, you kind of increasing the volume on the sides there. So we have this gain control to be able to control that. So I may be about 2 or 3 dB louder now than I was going in. So I'm just gonna back that off using this gain.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Can't stop this. Can't stop this. Can't stop this flow. No, no, no.
Okay, so that's just a little bit there. Now, another plugin that I like to use a lot is the Isotope let me see, what's the name of that joint? The Isotope Ozone 7 Imager. I really like to use that plugin a lot as well for my stereo enhancement. But again, I'm just trying to keep this to waves plugins that you can use when mastering. But if you have that Isotope Imager, then use that as well, okay? Or as an alternative, choose which one works best for you, which one you like the most, all right? But stereo enhancement, that's the next step. Now, after we've enhanced our stereo field, the next step is gonna be any de-essing if necessary, all right? So let's just open up a de-esser, And with this, we just really want to capture any sibilance in our mix, right? Any of those high frequencies that can make this mix really harsh, we want to kind of knock those off. And I found that that frequency range is about 9 to 10K, and you know, a little bit, anything above that is going to be just a little too harsh for us. So I'm using this Renaissance de-esser, and yeah, basically I'm just knocking off just a little bit of the high frequencies, just again to make sure that they don't become too harsh, especially as we going into compression and more EQ down the road. So yeah, I'm just de-essing this full mix here.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Can't stop this. Can't stop this. Can't stop this flow. No, 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 no. Am I gonna fumble? Am I?
You know, you don't want to get too much attenuation of those high frequencies, again, because it can sound really unnatural and kind of close your mix off. So you just want to kind of barely touch those high frequencies. And if you notice that there's too much sibilance going on, then you probably need to go back to your mix and do some adjustment with your EQing in there, all right? So the next step is going to be to use some multi-band compression. Now, using multi-band compression is going to allow you to really dial in the compression amounts for each band of frequencies in that mix. You know, your lows, your mids, your high mids, and your highs, all of that. You want to really dial those in. Now, the most important section here that you need to focus on when you are using a multi-band compressor is going to be that high mid range. That's where all of the magic is really happening in this mix, that you got to worry about those dynamics really being under control, but not squashed too much to where it sucks the life out your mix. You also want to make sure that your high frequencies and your low frequencies still have enough room to bounce and play so that your mix doesn't sound flat, right? So you want the highs, you want fast attack and fast release on those highs. Same with the lows, so that your mix can still be punchy and have the dynamics that you are looking for. So I'm going to use this C4 multi-band compressor, and I got a little bit of a rough setting. Kind of got my crossover set where I like them for a mix. But let's just take this off bypass and listen to what we got here.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow.
Right? If you notice anything kind of poking out, maybe your high frequencies or mid frequencies are kind of standing out a little bit too much, this can really help to minimize that. Sometimes I'll even solo each band and listen to them separately to make sure there's not too much compression or anything like that happening in each individual band.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop. Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow.
Yeah, man. So that really helps to rein in that the kind of broad spectrum of the mix, right? And each band is kind of being attenuated or compressed individually, which allows the mix to still move and have its dynamics without just squashing everything in one big swoop, okay? Now, I've also used this C4 as just for the EQ, right? I want it to be a little bit brighter on the high end, right? Which really helps that mix slap. And if you need a little more on the low end, add a dB or maybe a half a dB at the low end. But again, these are very subtle changes. Now, the key to multi-band compression is less is more. Don't overdo it, and you can make your mix really sound weird if you do too much, okay? Now, sometimes I'll take that a step further and add another EQ after the multi-band compressor if needed. Maybe some type of analog modeled EQ, but you know, for now, we'll just stick with that, okay? the next process that I'm gonna do is actually gonna be some limiting, okay? Now, I love the L2 limiter on most of my mixes. It just really helps the mix to kind of just glue together and get the loudness that I'm looking for pretty quickly. So with the L2, simply if I open this up, I'm just knocking it off probably about a dB or so on the output. And as far as the threshold, I just kind of like to play with that threshold. With this, I want to get about 2 to 4 dB of gain reduction. I don't want to squash it too much at this stage because I am going to do some processing later, okay? Some more compression in later via the master bus that we feeding into. So let's go ahead and check that out.
Am I gonna fumble? Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Can't stop this. Can't stop this. Can't stop this flow.
Oh yeah, so that really helps to bring that mix to life, and again has it sitting right out front of the speakers there. So I'm happy with that L2. Let's move on to our next process, okay? Now, if I had multiple records that I wanted to process, I would go over to my second record and go through all the same steps that I just did with the first record. But as I'm doing it, constantly check back and forth between the two records to see any consistencies or inconsistencies that may be happening with the frequency content, the loudness, the stereo width, all of that. And I can go back and make adjustments right here between the two records by just adjusting these plugins to kind of make sure that they are matching up as much as possible. And then finally, we'll come on down to my master bus and let's see the processes that I have here. Now, again, I told you that I like to use these Potec EQs. So I'm just going to make these active here. And if needed, you can do some enhancement here. Let's just bring this over here. If you need to kind of enhance, now you could also bring these directly to individual tracks if you want to, but sometimes I'll just do this as like a general equalization. After I get everything balanced and I'm looking at my real-time analyzers, I will just see, you know, what processes I need to make this actually work, okay? So you know what, I'm gonna actually, on my master bus, I'm going to insert this pass analyzer. This pass analyzer, and I'll actually keep this on the master bus for y'all, right? So it wasn't on there when we started, but when you open yours up, it'll be there, okay? So this pass analyzer basically will allow you to see the frequency spectrum of your music. So as I'm playing this, right, and you see that we kind of clip in there. So let's go ahead and turn this level down a little bit more. But I do have something to safeguard us from that clipping though. So as you see, I'm looking at my real-time analyzer and my frequency spectrum looks to be pretty even across the board. All right, I see that there is a little bit of a dip right around like 250, 260 hertz. And then my high end is kind of dipped out a little bit too, which is not a bad thing because again, I don't want it to be super harsh in this area, but maybe give a little boost around 5K, okay? So let's see, right around at 250 hertz, I was seeing that there is a little dip there. So let's see what we can do about that. Let me open up my other EQ again. Okay. So to get multiple plugins open, just hold shift as you are opening up another plugin window and you can see them all, okay? So let's go right about, let's see, 200 hertz. On the MEQ, and we're gonna just boost that a little bit. Let's just listen as we're doing it. Cool. And then I'm just gonna also use this EQ down here to give me a little boost around my 5K range. and it looks like we need to dip out, you know, during the, it needs to be kind of controlled right around the 1K range. So I'm just gonna back some of that off. So cool. So that really helps to add the final kind of tweaks on that mix. So as you can see, I fixed whatever problems I was having in that kind of 200 hertz range, and also kind of brightened it up a little bit in this kind of 5K range as well. And my mix is nice and wide. I'm seeing a lot of activity off to the sides as well as to the center. That's always an indication of a good mix, okay? My loudness standard nowadays, I'm using LUFS as my loudness standard, and I try to aim for about -11, -10 LUFS, somewhere around there. This meter does not show me my LUFS, but it does show peak and RMS, okay? The final step in this mix is going to be to use the maximizer. This is how I'm going to get the most overall loudness out of my mix, and actually we're going to keep this analyzer open as I open up my maximizer. I'm going to make that active, and let's go ahead and shift click to open it up. Now, I choose to use the Ozone 7 maximizer because it does have the IRC protection there. I like that fact. It's needed, especially if you're mixing for digital, you're mastering for digital. I keep my ceiling at about -0.5 because once this file gets converted to an MP3, for some reason they always seem to get a little bit louder once it's an MP3. So by having my ceiling set to -0.5, that just gives me a little bit of extra headroom to ensure that I won't clip once that conversion happens, okay? And I just set the threshold as needed. As far as the character of this maximizer is ultimately a limiter here. I'm just kind of going with more of a transparent, kind of slow speed on it. I'm linking my stereo a little bit together. That means that the left and right side are getting the same amount of compression. And then my transient emphasis is on, okay? This controls the amount of emphasis given to transients throughout the limiting process. And I do want the emphasis to be mostly on those transients, okay? So, yeah, I might make a few adjustments here, but let's take a listen. Am I gonna fall? I gotta let them know. Can't stop this flow. Can't stop this glow. I'm about to blow. Can't stop this. Can't stop this. Can't stop this flow. No, 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 no. Can't stop this flow. No, 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 no. Can't stop this flow. Cool. All right. And so that maximizer, again, that's going to help to make sure that I'm up to the loudness standards that I need to be without clipping and distorting and all of that, okay? So this is a really great tool to use. You got to play around with it a little bit to get the settings exactly how you like. As with everything in this chain here, take your time and do it right, all right? After you've gone through these processes, you can just go ahead and select each individual file and bounce them or print them as you usually would, all right? Thanks for checking out this mastering chain tutorial. I hope it helped you a lot. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, all right? And don't forget to be dope, man.